Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, a series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video, we're going to be looking at intrinsic versus extrinsic properties. Now, objects have a range of properties. They can be red, round, sweet, heavy, a father, an employee, bigger than a bread box, as tall as the Empire State Building, within a mile of home, and many other things. Philosophers sometimes divide these properties into different categories. In this video, we'll look at the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic properties. Now, intrinsic properties are those properties that objects have in virtue of the way that they are, not the way that they interact with the world. Volume, shape, or hunger might be examples of intrinsic properties. The volume or shape of an object is not dependent on some other object in the world. Other objects may change the volume or shape of an object, but an object does not have volume in virtue of having some relation to those objects. Similarly, you may be hungry upon smelling a delicious sandwich, but your hunger is a state that is internal to you, even if it's impacted or caused by something that's external to you. Extrinsic properties are those that an object has in virtue of the way that it interacts with the world. Being a mother, being within a mile of home, being taller than the Empire State Building are all generally considered extrinsic properties. Someone is a mother in virtue of having a particular relation to another object in the world, namely her child. You have the property of being within a mile of home in virtue of your relationship to a location in the world. If something is taller than the Empire State Building, it has that property in virtue of its relation to another object in the world. A common example of intrinsic versus extrinsic properties is, for the scientifically minded, is mass versus weight. Mass is the amount of matter in an object, something it has regardless of where it is. Weight is the gravitational force exerted on that object, which would change depending on where the object is. For example, on the Earth versus on the Moon. Some philosophers claim that these properties are actually not as clear-cut as they may seem. It may seem that intrinsic and extrinsic could map onto non-relational and relational properties. In other words, something is a mother because it bears a relation to a child. Something is larger than a bread box because it bears some relation to a bread box. However, there seem to be some relational properties that are intrinsic, such as having more eyes than noses, or having more leaves than branches. This is relations about parts of the object itself, but it's intrinsic because it's only about features of that object, not about anything outside of that object. So they're relational, but intrinsic. These are clearly expressing relations, but there's nothing outside the object which determines them, so they appear intrinsic. If you're concerned about the relational definition, you might try to offer one regarding aboutness, i.e. an intrinsic property is one that is about the object only, while an extrinsic property is about something else as well. You might also offer a definition that says intrinsic properties are those which are the concern of an object and its relations to and between its parts. You might even offer an argument that intrinsic properties are those that are always preserved if an object is duplicated, though such a definition runs into interesting modal consequences like whether bread boxes are different sizes in other possible worlds, and if bearing a relation to a logical truth would therefore be considered intrinsic, since logical truths are going to be the same in all possible worlds. So there are some interesting nuances with each of these possible kind of ways to tease apart this definition and get down to the really specific nature of what does it mean for something to be intrinsic or extrinsic. What do you think? How would you define intrinsic and extrinsic properties of an object? Stay tuned for a future video on pure and impure properties of objects. Subscribe if you like the content, hit the notification bell, and watch this video and more here at Carneades.org. And stay skeptical, everybody.